Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin, but more specifically, we are going to be talking about the Bitcoin dominance, which, as we know, is of course everyone's favorite topic. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and check out Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. We are running the sale right now, so make sure you guys check that out. Links in the description below. Let's go ahead and jump in. So we've had this theory for about 2 years now, maybe a little over 2 years, that the Bitcoin dominance will take a journey from 40% to 60%. That has been the theory, okay? And it has been a long journey, right? I mean, it's been a very long journey, and I think a lot of us are very weary of it. And I'm sure many of us would have just been happy if this whole dominance move would have occurred much sooner than the amount of time it is taking it to occur. But regardless, that was the theory. Now, one of the things about Bitcoin dominance we have to understand is, why do we make videos on Bitcoin dominance in the first place, right? It's not like you're going out there and buying Bitcoin dominance, right? Like if someone says, what did you DCA this week? Oh, I DCA'd some Bitcoin dominance, right? It's not like you're going out and doing that. So then why do we talk about it so much? Okay. The reason is to understand opportunity cost, or your risk-adjusted returns. That is the reason. Nothing more, nothing less. In late 2022, we said that there would likely be a drop in Q4, and there was, by the entire asset class. And one of the things I really struggled with back then was deciding how I wanted to tackle the pre-halving year. Because, of course, there's two ways that I could tackle it. Number one is to just say, DCA everything, right, or something. The other thing is to focus on the Bitcoin valuations of altcoins, because the Bitcoin valuations of altcoins are extremely different than the USD valuations. Now, of course, I knew that focusing on the Bitcoin valuations is the more difficult path to go down, especially if alt USD pairs go up, right? Because, if you think about it, if you DCA an altcoin throughout, say, the pre-halving year, and you see it go up 20% in a day at any point, right, that's going to make you feel pretty good. But the problem is that you would have, in most cases, not all, but in most cases, you would have been much better off just sticking with Bitcoin. Now, I will reiterate that my strategy with Bitcoin is not trying to time the market. It is just simply DCAing into the market based on the risk levels. We've talked about that on the channel many times. That is the strategy that I have implemented, and I've been following that same strategy for a long time, for many, many years, right? We first started talking about the risk metric back in 2019. But I've also come to find out the hard way many, many times that sticking with a Bitcoin heavy portfolio throughout the bear market year and the pre-halving year tends to outperform an altcoin heavy portfolio. And not by just a little bit, by a lot, right? And so if you wanted to preserve the Satoshi valuation of your portfolio, then you would want your portfolio to be Bitcoin heavy and not altcoin heavy. Now, anytime I say that, I know it's going to make a lot of people pissed off, because they're going to say, well, what about this altcoin that's up, 200% this year? Or what about that altcoin that's been putting in higher lows against Bitcoin? I have always and will always maintain that there are some exceptions to the rule. There are some exceptions. There always have been, there always will be. There's always exceptions to the rule. But the collective altcoin market has been bleeding against Bitcoin off and on for the last 2.5 years. Now, you might say, again, it's not 2.5 years if the low is put in August of 2022 at, just below 39%. But as I'm sure many of you could guess, right, the simple retort to that is that the reason we study Bitcoin dominance is to understand alt Bitcoin valuations, not to be overly concerned with how the stablecoin market fits into that. I think the stablecoin market cap is an important part of the cryptoverse that we should keep track of, and we do follow it occasionally. I even did a video on it a few months ago. But when we talk about Bitcoin dominance, what I'm mostly focused on is how I can use it to better understand alt Bitcoin pairs. And if you look at Bitcoin dominance, you know, since May of 2021, excluding stablecoins, it's been putting in higher lows, right? So collectively, the altcoin market has been bleeding back to Bitcoin for the last 2.5 years. 2.5 years. Now, early on in this trend, it was certainly not a popular view to talk about the Bitcoin dominance going higher, right? It was certainly not a popular view, and the Bitcoin dominance excluding stables is now at 57%. But again, this was not a popular view. A lot of people hated that view, and they were very bullish on the altcoin market. If you remember back when Bitcoin dominance was approaching 49%, there were a lot of people calling for alt season, right? A lot of people calling for a rejection at 49%, followed by quote unquote alt season. Now, people are celebrating alt season with dominance now at 53%. So what happened between here and here? Alt Bitcoin valuations bled. But because a lot of these altcoins are up on their USD pairs over the last few weeks, no one really cares about what their valuations were, you know, back in April. They just care about what they are today. So let's go through a few of these altcoins and where they are today on their USD valuations versus where they were in April, and then simply compare that to Bitcoin, okay? So, for instance, if we were to look at the collective altcoin market initially, you can see that the altcoin market is at 395 billion, right? Where was it in April? 395 billion, the same place it is today, right? The same exact place that it is today is where it was in April, and it's where it was in October of 2022, and it's where it was in July of 2022. Now, I'm not saying it can't go higher, but the point is that had you DCA'd the collective altcoin market versus Bitcoin, you would have been much better off with Bitcoin. Now, if you had picked one of the few altcoins that outperformed Bitcoin, then congratulations. I'm not trying to take that away from you. I'm not trying to minimize the risk that you took on. You took a calculated risk and it paid off. But for every one altcoin that outperformed Bitcoin, there was probably 50 that didn't. And that can be fully reflected in the fact that the altcoin market, it can be reflected by just by simply looking at Bitcoin dominance, right? If the altcoin market were holding up well against Bitcoin, then why has the dominance gone from 38% back in Q3 2022 to 53% in Q4 of 2023? So this has been a crazy journey by the Bitcoin dominance, and it's been putting in higher lows for over a year now, right? For over a year, dominance has in fact been putting in higher lows. And again, the issue is that altcoins have basically been bleeding against Bitcoin that entire process. Now, let's go look at a few altcoins, okay? So, first of all, there's Cardano, right? We can look at ADA and, you know, compare where it is today to where it was in April, right? In April, it was at 45 cents. Today, it's at 36 cents. Look at Avalanche, right? Today, it's at $13. Back in April, it was at $20. Look at Matic. Today, it's at what? 80 cents? Where was it back in February? Or even April, right? It was at $1.20 almost. So, I mean, I fully get it, right? I mean, I've been there a lot myself. But the reality is that, you know, the people that were dunking on the Bitcoin dominance back in April and February are now dunking on it again anytime it has a pullback. But it's like, but your altcoin, but a lot of these altcoins are well below where they were even in early 2023. So the dominance view has been correct, right? I mean, like, you would have been better off in Bitcoin, right? You would have been better off in Bitcoin for most of these altcoins. Polkadot is now at $5. And, you know, in July, it was at almost $6. In April, it was at almost $7. In February, it was at $8. So it's I feel like I put myself in a pretty difficult spot with the altcoin market, because anytime that it gets any type of a rally, right? Like anytime it does this, I never hear the end of it, right? Until we get a correction, right? I simply never hear the end of it. But the issue is that while Polkadot has been putting in lower highs, Bitcoin has been putting in higher lows. So yes, I mean, I get that people are happy that their altcoin is marginally off their lows, but you would have been better off with Bitcoin. So much better off with Bitcoin over the last couple of years than you would have been with the altcoin market. So that is the reason why we talk about it. Now, I don't want to cherry pick the few, just those few altcoins that I know have been doing poorly. We can also talk about some that have been doing a little bit better. XRP has been one that has been putting in higher lows since June of 2022, right? This is XRP is one that I really do have mixed feelings on. It did pretty well for me back in 2017. Last cycle, it didn't really do that well. We had this massive sell-off after the whole SEC stuff, and it put in a lower high. So, I mean, yes, it's been putting in higher lows since June, but I mean, it didn't even put in a higher high in the bull market when the Fed printed $6 trillion. So, I do struggle with that to some degree, because normally what you would want to see is you would want to see altcoins putting in higher highs from one cycle to another, not lower highs or not double tops or anything like that. Now, we could give XRP the benefit of the doubt and say that maybe if the SEC hadn't done this, it would have put in a higher high. That's a possibility, right? But this just goes to show you that there are some coins that have not been putting in lower highs all year, right? Like ADA has been putting in, it hasn't been lower highs all year, right? I mean, you can see February was a high, and then April was a higher high, and then we had a lower high, and then basically, it's sort of back at that level. Avalanche, has just been putting in lower highs all year, right? Polkadot has just been putting in lower highs all year. Litecoin was putting in higher highs for a while, but we noted many, many times that it normally sells off into its halving. And I believe we actually can look at that on one of these charts there. Yeah. So we sort of drew this out and said, look, I mean, it typically peaks right before it's halving and then sells off. And I mean, sure enough, I mean, it did the exact same thing that it always does. And, it should not be that surprising, right? I mean, this is what it always does, is it peaks out before the halving, and then it gets pretty boring until late halving year or post halving year for Bitcoin. I mean, it just kind of does this for a while. Pretty boring after that. It doesn't mean it can't go up occasionally, right? I mean, like, yeah, 10% here, 20% there, minus 40% here, right? I mean, it can do that. But the problem is that in this case, again, Litecoin is where it was back in November 2022. And Bitcoin is more than 2x off its low. So we must understand the importance of dominance, right? You have to understand it. I mean, it's not, to me, it's one of the most fundamental parts of the Cryptoverse that we must understand. And I mean, I get that if you're DCAing an altcoin and if it's off its low, you feel great this week. And I mean, why shouldn't you? I mean, the market's up a lot. Total 3 is up a lot. If you took on a risk, congratulations, it paid off. But, if you were to go over to a DCA tool, right? So this is a DCA tool. This shows you, had you started DCAing Bitcoin and let me just carry it out through today. How you started DCAing Bitcoin just in 2023. Let's suppose you didn't do it at all in 2022. You just started $100 a week in 2023. Then you would have invested $4,500 and it would be currently worth around $6,000, right? So not bad. You probably feel pretty good about that. You're up 33% on your money. Now, had you lump summed, of course, you would be up even more. But the reality of the situation is most people just put a portion of their paycheck into crypto. And so, the idea is that, you don't have the ability to lump sum because, if you did, you probably would have put the money in the market back then. And if you are just bringing in a paycheck, you're just putting a portion of that paycheck into the market. So had you done it with Bitcoin, you'd be up 33%. Now, where would you be if you had done the same thing with Ethereum? I imagine you would be up right now, but not as much. You'd be up about 11%, right? What if you had carried out the same thing with, and let me actually put them all in the same chart so we can compare them. So compare it to ETH. Let's look at BNB. We'll throw XRP. There's Solana. Solana's had a great year this year. It also, I've said this before, I think Solana pulled forward a lot of its losses at the end of last year due to the FTX collapse. Cardano, you know, and so on and so forth, right? I mean, that's a good sample set. So Solana has done the best, right? But it also sold off the hardest last year. XRP is up 51%. That's one of the few that has been putting in higher lows. ADA, you'd be up 15.5%. BNB, you'd be down 3%. So in this case, Bitcoin is sort of in the upper half of that of just those top coins that we happen to pick, right? I'm trying to be open and honest. I'm not trying to cherry pick ones that I know have outperformed or underperformed. That's just what it is, right? It's sort of in the middle. Now, if we add on a lot of other random ones, Dogecoin I know is a favorite. Let's add Litecoin and Polkadot and Matic, and there's Avalanche and Uniswap, and there's Stellar and Monero. Let's just go see what those did. Now, where does Bitcoin rank on this list of all the ones we just added? It's still number 3, right? So Solana and XRP have outperformed it. There's always a few that do. I will reiterate, there's always a few that do. But look at all the other ones. They've underperformed Bitcoin. So again, rather than stress yourself out figuring out which altcoin is going to outperform Bitcoin, my view is that you're better off just sticking with Bitcoin and saying, well, you know, the altcoin market's going to do what it's going to do. I'll just stick with Bitcoin because I can't possibly know which one's going to do better. Had you started DCAing like mid-2022, I imagine it would look worse for, you know, for something like Solana that sold off aggressively. It went from like $40 to $10 in just a few months. And we could add a few more. Let's add maybe just a few more. Link, there's Cosmos, there's VeChain. There's a few more that we could add on there. And where does it rank? It ranks number 4. So Link currently outperforms it. But Link is one that outperformed Bitcoin in 2019 as well, right? It was one of the few altcoins I spoke a lot about on my channel back then. And it does tend to outperform Bitcoin in the pre-halving year. By tends to, I mean data point of 1. It did it in 2019 and it's currently doing it in 2023. But that would not have been the case if we had done the same thing 3 weeks ago, right? I mean, Link's gone up a lot over a span of a very short period of time. So again, throughout the pre-halving year, there are a few that have outperformed Bitcoin, but the majority have not. And a lot of them are in the red, in fact, right? I mean, DCAing them, you know, you might feel good this week, but again, like, you know, some of them, you know, AVAX, Uni, BNB, Dot, Matic, Atom, and Litecoin, they're all down on your DCAs this year. Like, you'd literally be in the red on DCAs of those altcoins this year. With Bitcoin, you would have been up 33%. 33% versus negative 5%. And all you had to do was stick with Bitcoin and look, you know, try to figure out what direction is Bitcoin dominance going to go. So that's why we talk about Bitcoin dominance, right? That's the reason. It's to understand what is the risk adjusted returns. What are the risk adjusted returns, and does it make sense to DCA into altcoins or not? Now, guys, I'm not going to go on this parade forever, right? I mean, I'm not going to just sort of wave the Bitcoin dominance theory at everyone forever. Normally, sometime in the halving year is when altcoins collectively start to outperform Bitcoin. Collectively. Now, some of you guys are probably like, well, what is he talking about? My altcoins already been outperforming Bitcoin. That's great, right? If it has, then that probably bodes well for that altcoin in future years. But what I'm talking about is the collective altcoin market does not tend to bottom out against Bitcoin until sometime in the halving year or late pre-halving year, right? But collectively, historically, it's been in the halving year. By historically, I mean last cycle, right? So when we think about it like that, it's important to recognize that, you know, it's not like the altcoin market will underperform Bitcoin forever. Probably won't. At some point in 2024, I imagine the collective altcoin market will start to outperform Bitcoin. But it doesn't change the fact that being Bitcoin heavy as opposed to altcoin heavy would have been mathematically better if you average it out for the entire altcoin market. If we pick a few, we can find a few that outperform Bitcoin. But collectively, they did not. You would have been much better off with Bitcoin. And not only in the pre-halving year, but also in the bear market year. One way to visualize this is to go look at their Bitcoin valuations, but then take the inverse, right? So like look at 1/8 of Bitcoin, right? And I mean, look at this. In August of 2021, one Bitcoin would have fetched you 16,000 ADA. Today, one Bitcoin fetches you around 99,000 ADA. Just a few weeks ago, it would have fetched you over 120,000 ADA. I imagine it's been sort of riding that bull market support band for almost the entire time, with the exception of right here. You can see it was below it. There was a wick below it right here, and we're now currently below it again. And there was also a wick right here below it as well. But for the most part, it's been trending higher. And again, had you stuck with Bitcoin over a lot of altcoins, you would see the same trend, right? And you can go look at it for a lot of different altcoins, right? I mean, there's AVAX as well. I mean, look at this, right? Like one Bitcoin back in late 2021 would have fetched you 385 AVAX. Today it gets you 2,700 AVAX. A huge difference. Look at Polkadot. Look at this one. 1/. Bitcoin gives you the Bitcoin dot valuation. And I mean, it still hasn't even pulled back to the bull market support band despite this pullback. In 2021, one Bitcoin would have fetched you about 1,100 dot. Today, it gets you 7,000 dot. We've been bullish on Bitcoin dominance for the last 2 years. So had you just, stuck your altcoins into Bitcoin 2 years ago in Q1 of 2022, I mean, you're essentially, even if you did it here in January or February, I made a video in early 2022 saying that altcoins were too risky with respect to Bitcoin. That was likely going to stay that way for the next couple of years. Even if you had done that at January 2022, your DOT, had you converted them to Bitcoin, would have preserved your Satoshi valuation of your portfolio. But had you kept it in DOT, the Satoshi valuation of your portfolio has just been absolutely wrecked. So again, the whole point is to say, look, guys, I mean, you would have been much better off just sticking with Bitcoin in the bear market year and the pre-halving year for whatever exposure you wanted in crypto. That's the point. Now in 2022, I often said cash is king. I often said that in 2022. It's not like I was saying that Bitcoin was king in 2022, but in pre-halving years, Bitcoin dominance tends to go up a lot no matter the direction of Bitcoin USD. So this same type of analysis can be done on the majority of the altcoin market, the majority of them. And, I look at some of these altcoins that I've covered in the last bull market, right? I mean, I look at ADA and I look at Link and Polkadot and whatnot and XRP and Avalanche, right? And I mean, I look at it and I'm like, it still is a lower high for a lot of them, right? I'm not saying it can't turn into something more than that. At some point, it probably will, right? I mean, the market's not going to go down forever. But DOT literally just put in a new low less than a month ago. Less than 1 month ago, DOT put in a new low. I mean, it's crazy how quickly the market changes from, altcoins putting in new lows again to everyone getting very, very bullish on altcoins. DOT put in a new low less than a month ago, So if I wanted to, I could go out and buy an altcoin and still get it pretty close to these historic lows. But the issue is that there's not even a guarantee that this is the low. It could be, right? I mean, this is where it sort of hit this low over here. It could be, but it could also simply take out that low eventually, for all we know, right? I don't know. And if it does, maybe it'll retest it at some point, right? There's all sorts of things that could happen. But the point is that, the case to be made here could have been made here as well, and there, and there, and there. And it was. And every single time the pitchforks came out, the Bitcoin dominance view was mocked, and the entire time, the dominance of Bitcoin just keeps going higher. So my point is not to try to, catch the falling knives of the altcoin market. My point is to say one thing simply. Exposure to crypto in Bitcoin preserves the Satoshi valuation of your portfolio. Yes, if you speculate long enough on the altcoin market, you're going to get some pretty great pumps. Polkadot got this nice move over here, 60% rally back in Q3 of 2022. In October of 2022, it got a 30% rally. In January of 2022 through April, it went up 84%. In June of this year, it went up 33%. Right now, it's up about 40%. DOT's had some great rallies, right? There's been some money to be made on this altcoin if you're timing each of these lows. But the issue is that a lot of people, they just keep, they DCA it all the way down, hoping that it eventually works out. And guys, I'll be honest, like at some point, there's a good chance that it will be in the money again. If you DCA long enough and you stick with it and you sort of wait for looser monetary policy to come back, there's a good chance that would work out. But where it doesn't necessarily work out is the Satoshi valuation of your portfolio. There's no guarantee that Bitcoin ever sees a new high, right? There's no guarantee that it does. There's a lot of altcoins that never see new highs on their Bitcoin pairs. And at this point, Bitcoin is down 86% from its high. 86% from the high. That's a huge drop. So, if you have been DCAing it, hell, DOT would have to go up, right, 120% just against Bitcoin just to get back to where it was in February. This year, just to get back to where it was this year, this February. It'd have to go up 123%. I'm not saying it can't do that, but wouldn't you feel a lot better if your portfolio had been Bitcoin heavy instead of, say, DOT heavy for the last year, and then you reserve the right to come in during the halving year and say, all right, what altcoins look to be bottoming out against Bitcoin, and which ones might actually outperform Bitcoin once we go back to looser monetary policy? That's the point. And, this is something that I thought long and hard about back in late 2022 as to whether I wanted to go this route or not. I knew the easier route will be to just look at USD pairs and make the super hyped up videos and whatnot anytime the USD pair bounced 10%. But I knew I would be doing a disservice to everyone by doing that because the Satoshi valuation is bleeding. AVAX Bitcoin. Has the Satoshi valuation of AVAX ever stopped bleeding? Has it? At every single point, you would have had a reason to believe that it was done. And it hasn't stopped. Right? There's a few that that look different. Look at Link Bitcoin. Technically, these are all lower highs. Technically speaking, this is a nice breakout. Right? This is a nice breakout. So far, it's still a lower high. I'm not saying it can't turn into something else, but even then, it's still just at the valuation it was at back in November of 2022. So a lot of these altcoins follow a similar path, right? And rather than continue to cherry pick every single well, maybe one more. Matic Bitcoin is an interesting one. This is one I've been following somewhat closely because it's been close to breaking down here and it hasn't done it. So we'll see. I'm really curious how this one is going to play out here over the coming months. And look, we could go down the list, but I think the better thing to do is to look at total 3 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin. Okay. Now, this chart, I think, is one of the more important charts in the Cryptoverse. It's basically a derivative of Bitcoin dominance. It's just the altcoin market minus the stablecoin market cap of Tether divided by Bitcoin. Now, some people say, well, why don't you include USDC or DAI or, all these other stablecoins? The argument is that it's sort of a rounding error. I don't need to go through every single stablecoin and include it. It's sort of a rounding error at the end of the day. The market cap of Tether is, let's just go grab it here, is 86 billion. If I were to add up USDT, USDC, DAI, and BUSD, it's at 117 billion. It's not a huge difference. I mean, it is a difference, right? But it's not a huge difference, right? It's not a huge difference. So if you look at total 3 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin, you get a chart that looks like this. And it should be very familiar to you. Look at the chart. In 2023 alone, let's look at yearly candles. All Bitcoin pairs collectively are down 38%. This is what they look like. Look at last cycle. This was 2018, 2019, 2020. What do you notice? 3 red candles in a row. 3 red in a row. You would have been better off last cycle, for the most part, just hanging out in Bitcoin until it hit a new all-time high and then converting to alts. I understand that can be difficult for a lot of people, especially if those altcoins are 2x off their lows on their USD pairs or 3x off their lows. But the issue is that Bitcoin was already like 6 or 7x off its lows. So had you stuck with Bitcoin until it hit new highs, most of the alts were just bleeding against Bitcoin during that entire time. I mean, look at the chart, right? Total 2 minus US, or total 3 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin. In 2018, right? In 2018, you can see it dropped from 0.89 to 0.58. 89%. This is a 35% drop. And then here in 2019, it dropped 50%. And then in 2020, it dropped 26%. 3 years in a row, alt Bitcoin pairs collectively bled. One single year, 2021, which is the year everyone watching this video is probably craving for. You're craving for that alt season. That's what alt season looks like. That's what alt season looks like, right? Where dominance is dropping from some major level to a much lower level, where it's dropping from 60% to 40% over the span of 2 or 3 months. That is alt season, okay? That is what alt season is. Here, the alt market is just bleeding back to Bitcoin. Now, yes, some of the altcoins are going up on their USD pairs, but a lot of them are still below their yearly highs, right? Go take a look at ADA USD, right? Its yearly high was 45 cents. It's still sitting at 36 cents. I'm not saying it can't take out the yearly high. There's a good chance it could, but Bitcoin's sitting at a yearly high right now. It's over 36K right now. XRP is below its yearly high. Avalanche, way below its yearly high of $22. Polkadot, well below its yearly high of almost $8. Litecoin, well below its yearly high of $114. Uni, well below its yearly high of $7.50. Is it up over the last month? Yeah, it's up 26%. Great. Okay? Pop the champagne. The issue is that it's been bleeding back to Bitcoin the entire time. So, we talk about Bitcoin dominance, not to understand magically, you know, where alt USD pairs are going to be, but just to help us identify if altcoins are worth the risk with respect to Bitcoin, not with respect to the US dollar. It's not the Altcoin Reckoning, as I've said almost every single video that I do on Bitcoin dominance and the Altcoin Reckoning, right? It's always, and it always has been, alt Bitcoin pairs. That's where they get wrecked, right? Let me give you an example. Back in mid 2022, I converted some ETH to Bitcoin right here. I also converted some more down here, admittedly, just so all the cards are on the table. And then I converted more up here. So I did three batches of ETH to Bitcoin. And now ETH Bitcoin is down here at 0.052. So I converted my ETH to Bitcoin, a lot of it, most of it, back then, because I didn't believe in the merge flippening stuff. And look at this. ETH Bitcoin, let's just say the average is somewhere in here, is down 26%. So I could go convert that Bitcoin that I converted from ETH, I could go convert that back to ETH and have more Ether than I had otherwise. And the reason why I like to do that with a lot of the altcoins and Ethereum is because I still have exposure to the upside of Bitcoin, but I minimize my downside risk of the altcoin market, right? So where are we right now with total 3 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin? Because this is an important chart, and it's sitting at 44%. Now, I'll tell you what happened last cycle, okay? We only have one data point to compare to here. So I'll tell you what happened last cycle, and you can figure out if you think that's going to happen again or not, right? What happened last cycle? The first test at this level, we bounced. What happened this cycle? The first test, we bounced. What happened last cycle? The second test, we bounced again. What happened here? It bounced again. What happened on the third test? It broke down. Why did it break down? Why did it break down? Did it break down because Bitcoin was going up? Did it break down because Bitcoin was going down? That's probably an important thing to look at, right? It's probably an important thing to look at. What have I said all along the purpose of Bitcoin rallies are? What have I said? Bitcoin rallies break alt Bitcoin pairs down. That's what they do. So that when Bitcoin then rolls over into a correction at some point, the alts continue to get crushed. Okay, so look at this. Look what happened. I mean, it's an important thing to sort of acknowledge. Altcoins broke down against Bitcoin. They broke below this threshold that they were trying to hold at around that 41, 42% level. They were holding it from September 2018 until July of 2019, right? Almost a year. And it finally broke. Why did it break down? On a Bitcoin rally, on a Bitcoin pump, it broke alt Bitcoin pairs down. Why? Because altcoins struggle to catch a bid compared to Bitcoin when Bitcoin's going up too quickly, right? Think about what's going on today. You have the SPY ETF, right? You have the halving narrative, all this institutional narrative stuff, right? Bitcoin is going up quicker than most of the altcoin market collectively, right? And so when Bitcoin moves a few $1,000s, the dominance goes up a lot, and then altcoins can't compete with Bitcoin when it's moving up too quickly. And so what happens? They bleed against Bitcoin. On those rallies by Bitcoin, alt Bitcoin pairs tend to bleed. Let's look at an example right now. I mean, like, I think Bitcoin is up. Bitcoin is up to, it's at 36,400. What are alt Bitcoin pairs doing? Most of them are down. There's a couple here that are up slightly. This one, Maker Bitcoin's up 0.05%, and Aave Bitcoin is up 1.53%. Most of these are down, right? Ether Bitcoin's down. ADA Bitcoin is slightly down. A lot of these are slightly down right now. So the issue here for the altcoin market is that if Bitcoin pumps at all, then alts can't keep up, right? Like, imagine if like the spot ETF or something is approved and there's like a liquidity rush into Bitcoin, and then it does something like where it did in 2019, where it shoots up and then puts in this local high, comes back down, maybe shoots back up again. That's where, look at this, that's where alt Bitcoin pairs broke down last time, right here. That's where they broke down. It was when Bitcoin went on sort of this little short-term moon mission before reversing course and dropping, 60, 70% before the halving. And that is where alt Bitcoin pairs broke down. So even though Bitcoin fell back down later on, right? Like, even though it eventually fell back down, look what happened to alt Bitcoin pairs. They never recovered in the short term. I mean, eventually they did, right? But they did not recover in the short term, and they did not get back above this threshold in a sustained way until March of 2021. March of almost 2 years later it took. And why did they get back above it then? I'm glad you asked, right? We went back to looser monetary policy. We went back to QE. We went back to favorable monetary conditions for highly risky assets like the altcoin market. But it took a Bitcoin rally to break these altcoins off of their support levels, so that when then Bitcoin rolled over, the altcoin market had nowhere to hide, and they kept going down on their Bitcoin pairs, and then they finally bottomed out on their Bitcoin pair here in September of 2019. They then double bottomed in May of 2020, and then they even had sort of like a Wyckoff spring in December 2020, January 2021. I mean, think about it. Like, you could have just had a Bitcoin heavy portfolio until January of 2021, and then you could have made a killing in the altcoin market just by converting your Bitcoin back to altcoins. You could have literally sat out of the altcoin market for 3 years. Look at these 12-month candles again. You could have sat out of the altcoin market for 3 years, just focused on Bitcoin accumulation because you thought the Bitcoin dominance was going higher, focused on Bitcoin accumulation, and then after Bitcoin broke its highs and went parabolic, then you convert your Bitcoin to alts. And then you make all the money in the altcoin market, where that's when altcoins shot up like crazy, right? For 3 years in a row, alts pled against Bitcoin. Now, I know what you're probably thinking, right? You're probably thinking, well, Ben, last cycle alts bottomed out in September of 2019. Is it not possible that they've bottomed out here in October of 2023? Yeah, anything's possible. You're not going to say to me that it's impossible for that to be the case. But what I would also say as a retort is that the altcoin market, in my opinion, this is not proven because we only have one data point. It's not proven. But in my opinion, the altcoin market bottomed in September because the Fed had already started to cut interest rates in July. The Fed started to cut interest rates in July. We were going back to looser monetary policy. Therefore, riskier assets like altcoins were able to outperform the king. So after we started to cut interest, after the Fed started to cut, that's when alts bottomed out against Bitcoin. It wasn't before then. So when I think about like, okay, well, is it possible that they've bottomed out against Bitcoin in October, around the same time as last cycle, September? Look, guys, anything's possible. Anything's possible. And Bitcoin's at 36.4K. I thought the highest Bitcoin was going to go this year was 35K. Okay, so it's higher than what I thought was going to be the highest valuation for the year. Anything's possible. But the point is fundamentally it would make sense that you would need looser monetary policy for alts to sustainably outperform Bitcoin. It doesn't mean that they don't occasionally get a nice pop for a few months, just like we've seen many, many times. I mean, look from June of 2022 until March of the following year, right? And pretty nice move to the upside. So I think that's where I am. Like, I don't know, is it worth considering that it took looser monetary policy? Or is it more so worth considering just sort of the time in the market, right? Or the time of the market, right? September of 2019, October of 2020, right? That's the hard part to figure out, right? Like, that's the hard part to figure out. And, up until now, I still hold the view that Bitcoin dominance is going higher, right? I don't really have a strong reason to think that Bitcoin dominance has topped out just yet. And I know some people are going to say that it has topped out, but a lot of the people that have disagreed with me about Bitcoin dominance also disagree with me about it in 2022 and in mid 2023. I mean, they've disagreed about it the entire way. And so, I mean, even this past week, I had people dunking on me on Twitter because dominance had dropped back. And I'm like, guys, dominance just went up 10 weeks in a row. And this one red week did not even retrace the 10th green week. It didn't even retrace the 10th green week. So, I think one thing to consider when it comes to total 3 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin is, what happens if the spot ETF gets approved or something, and we see this pump on Bitcoin continue into, I don't know how long it'll last. It breaks all Bitcoin pairs off of their support levels, and then it rolls over. We get a correction sometime before the halving, and then that's when altcoins start to bottom out against Bitcoin once the Fed goes to looser monetary policy. I'm not saying that altcoins aren't going to do well in their USD pairs between now and then. They could. Some of them have probably already bottomed on their USD pairs, but the point is that they probably are still bleeding against Bitcoin. When Bitcoin moves like this, the alt market just, it can't compete in the same way. Look at this, like Bitcoin's up 2.5% today. A lot of these altcoins are not up 2.5%, right? It's less than 2.5%. They cannot compete with Bitcoin when it's moving this quickly. And so what happens is the dominance of Bitcoin just goes higher. The argument is that Bitcoin dominance goes up no matter the direction of Bitcoin USD. That's the argument, right? If Bitcoin goes up, great, dominance goes up. If Bitcoin goes down, great, dominance goes up. It goes up no matter what. That's the point. Think about these 10 green weeks by dominance, 10 green weeks in a row. Bitcoin USD was not green for those 10 weeks, right? Bitcoin USD had 3 red weeks here, and then another red week, and then 2 more, right? So I believe 6 of those 10 weeks were actually red for Bitcoin USD, but they were still green for Bitcoin dominance. So more than half, Bitcoin went down, but Bitcoin dominance still went up. So, I mean, that's what we have to look for. I mean, look, for Bitcoin USD, there's really no, I can't tell you where. I have no idea where it's going to top out in the short term, right? I mean, it seems like it's trying to break out of this trend line here. If it does, I imagine that would elicit some FOMO. If it doesn't, then watch out below, right? If it does break above this and sort of go higher, then you're likely going to very quickly see total 3 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin. You're likely going to see that break down. And the issue is that then if Bitcoin USD, finds some type of local top for a few months and then rolls over, the argument is that alts will not be able to reclaim this level, potentially not until the post-halving year. That's the argument, right? Is that they can't necessarily reclaim this level until the post-halving year, if they in fact break down. So that's kind of where I am on the altcoin market with respect to Bitcoin, is that the king is likely going to outperform them until we get to looser monetary policy. It doesn't mean they can't go up on their USD pairs. I will keep saying it. It doesn't mean they can't, but it just means that most of them have bled back to Bitcoin. One of the most common responses to these videos that I see is like, oh, well, I wish I had bought this altcoin because it's up 20% this week. Guys, I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm telling you my strategy, and I'm trying to provide the rationale for it. But if you want to go be a degen in the altcoin market, go do it, right? What's right for me is not what's right for you. Crypto is a personal journey, right? Investing is a personal journey. What's right for you is not what's right for someone else. If someone sells all their Bitcoin at a certain price and you laugh at them because the price goes higher, that's not the right thing to do. Maybe they didn't want to take on as much risk as you. Back in 2021, I sold a lot of my Bitcoin into this first peak. I mean, it's all documented on ITC Premium. Like, it's all documented. I sold a lot of my Bitcoin into this first peak, 87%, in fact, of my Bitcoin. And I mean, gosh, I was getting mocked like crazy, even on there, because everyone was saying, well, Bitcoin's going to 300K. Why you sell 87% of it? Is because the risk levels were at 0.95. Like, guys, it's not going to go up forever. So yeah, I mean, I sold a lot all the way up, and I converted into ETH and alt, because that's where alt season comes from after Bitcoin hits new highs. The issue is that if you get a rally like this where Bitcoin doesn't hit new highs, then altcoins get crushed in that phase, right? But if you get new highs, then altcoins can go up a lot more. So, and then on the same thing with the risk levels, I DCA'd in this region. And again, it's all documented on ITC Premium. And I've said many times that like DCA is the only way I navigate Bitcoin according to the risk levels. That's the only way. I don't really try to time the market. I just DCA when it hits these certain risk levels, and that's it. And I wait until it goes up to either if it goes up to a high enough risk level, I'll sell. If it goes back down to a lower risk level, I'll buy. But that's all I do. So again, for me, my strategy is still thinking that the Bitcoin dominance is going to go higher. I think that, once we get into the halving year, I will probably start to, not be as vocal about these views, because I don't expect dominance to go up forever, right? People say I'm a maxi, but I'm not. I don't expect Bitcoin dominance to go up forever, but I do expect it to, to go up, probably for the rest of the year, off and on, right? I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean it has to put on a new high this year, although it certainly could. If you were to go look at year-to-date ROI of Bitcoin dominance without stablecoins, one of the things we said in a prior video was that if you average out 2015 and 2019 and compare that to 2023, we said, look, guys, we're likely going to close this gap. We closed it, right? The last video, or maybe 2 videos ago on dominance, we showed this chart when dominance was all the way down here, and I said we're likely going to close this gap, and we did on day 297. The year-to-date ROI of Bitcoin dominance, excluding stables, was at 1.22, which is exactly where the average was from the last 2 pre-halving years. So I think it likely could just keep going up into the end of the year, and in the year at around 1.25x off the yearly open. For reference, right now it's sitting at around 1.18x off the yearly open. So it could move up, you know, a few percentage points before the year is even over, potentially. And it likely would if Bitcoin, you know, if Bitcoin, if it can break through this resistance level on total 3 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin, right? So if it can break through here, if it can break this, then guess where support is? It's all the way down here at 25%. And 25% from here is a 42% drop by the altcoin market against Bitcoin. I mean, it wouldn't be surprising. I mean, that's what it did last cycle, right? It bounced again, it rolled over. When it rolled over, that marks when it broke through here. The month that it broke through, that's the month the Bitcoin's yearly high was in. Okay? So I thought that the yearly high for Bitcoin was likely in during the summer months. Okay? That was my assumption. I'm not going to pretend like it wasn't. I thought the yearly high was probably in. Starting this year, I said Bitcoin will likely go as high as 35K. I was wrong, right? I mean, it's above 36K right now. But that was my view going into the year. I mean, when you start the year, Bitcoin was less than $17,000. To say that it could go as high as 35K, and then to sort of get people to dunk on me now that it's like 36K, I mean, it's kind of hard, right? I mean, there's no way I can possibly know exactly where the high is going to be, and for all I know, it could continue going up in the short term. So when you look at this chart, if Bitcoin can break alts off of their Bitcoin support levels, then you can see where the next support is for the altcoin market. It's a lot further down. It's a big if, right? It's a big if. And I mean, you could argue that if there's like a soft landing and we don't get harder economic times, then maybe it'll hold. But my view is that this will break down. That's my view, that it'll break down just like it broke down over here. By the way, last time when it broke down, the second attempt was in May, and then it successfully broke it in June. Here, this attempt was in October. Maybe it'll successfully break down in this month, in November. But there's multiple ways that it breaks down. One way is Bitcoin shoots up and alt Bitcoin pairs break down. The other way is Bitcoin goes down and alt Bitcoin pairs go down and alt USD pairs go down. What's interesting is, if you look at last cycle, if we overlay Bitcoin USD onto this chart, and if we overlay interest rates, you can see that Bitcoin topped out just before the first rate cut. Just before the first rate cut. Right? And terminal rate was already in. Terminal rate was in. Just before the first rate cut is where Bitcoin USD topped out. What if it's doing the same thing, right? What if it's going to top out just before we get to rate cuts? There's a chance. Who knows when the rate cuts are going to be? I mean, the market doesn't think they're going to be till till mid next year. And maybe they're right. I mean, maybe they're right. But I also know that that if the labor market starts to show weakness, then the Fed could easily cut well before summer of 2024. There's a lot of people that were very bearish on the bond market a couple weeks ago, and I actually picked up a position because I'd been watching it for a while, and I thought that higher for longer was getting priced in. It wasn't going to continue to go up forever, and the bond market has seen a pretty significant bounce here, right? I mean, look at this bounce by the bond market. You know, I did a video on the S&P 500 outlook, and I said, look, guys, Yellen just issued shorter duration than the market was expecting. That's bullish for both bonds and stocks. I put out a tweet and a video in July 2023 saying that stocks and bonds were likely going to go down, and they did, right? I mean, TLT dropped 25%. The S&P dropped 10 or 11%. And then on the S&P Outlook video, we said, all right, Yellen issued shorter duration, and also the ISM came in pretty bad, showing a pretty weak economy. That means lower rates, right? Lower rates, long end of the yield curve goes back down. And if the long end of the yield curve goes back down, risk assets go up, right? Stocks go up, and so too do bonds. And the reason why bonds go up is because if the long end of the yield curve is going down, bonds are going back up. In the short term, when bonds are going down, when bonds are going up, when the long end of the yield curve is going down, that's bullish for risk assets because it's less pressure on risk assets. The issue is that if the long end of the yield curve is going down for the wrong reasons, like the economy is slowing down, then it might take risk assets a few more months to recognize, oh crap, like that's why it's going down. It's because something's fundamentally wrong with the economy and we're about to get a recession. So, I mean, you know, I said it was both bullish for bonds and stocks. You can see it was also bullish for the altcoin market and Bitcoin as well. But arguably, Bitcoin was, you know, doesn't necessarily need it. It wasn't necessarily dependent on that. And Bitcoin was already going up before that. So I don't really think Bitcoin is necessarily dependent on that to do well. So total 3 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin still needs to break down. Hasn't done it yet. Total 2 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin. It's still pretty elevated. And the difference between this one and the one we just looked at is that this is a lower low, right? It did not put in a double bottom. This is a lower low, right? In June, it hit 78%. And then in October, it hit 71%. There's no guarantee that this is the bottom for total 2 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin. In fact, it's probably not. It probably goes a lot lower. If we were to fast forward like 6 to 12 months, I imagine it'll be a lot lower than where it is right now. But this thing just put in a new low 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, a new low for this cycle. For the entire cycle that we've been watching. Total 2 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin. Total 2 includes ETH, by the way. Total 3 does not. Total 2 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin shows a new low, meaning that Ethereum has been showing weakness. It has. You know, I mean, they might not want to admit it, but it has. Ethereum has been relatively weak against the altcoin market. Because if you only look at the altcoin market with respect to Bitcoin, it held this low. Now, admittedly, the altcoin market has bled a lot more than Ethereum so far. But when you look at total 2 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin, when you include ETH, it was a lower low, meaning that ETH is underperforming. That's clearly found in the fact that ETH dominance continues to go down. How many times have we been saying that ETH dominance is likely putting in lower highs, just like Bitcoin dominance is over a longer time frame, but it's also putting in higher lows? ETH dominance has fallen off a cliff recently. Speaking of ETH, what if that's the last major support level to drop? What if that's the last one? Do you guys remember this trend line we were following? And I said, guys, look, I know it's a descending wedge, and people say technically it's a bullish thing, but we had the same thing last cycle and it broke down. And I saw someone say that these were cope lines because it was going to break to the upside. It broke down, right? It broke down just like it did last cycle. Why did it break down? Because Bitcoin pumped. The Bitcoin rally took Ether Bitcoin off of this support level. So where is the final support? Right here. This is the last support. You know? There's a wick all the way down here. But you can, you sort of look at this range here. I mean, I don't really like to spend, I mean, this is like a single wick that we barely spend any time at, but I mean, this is the support for Ether Bitcoin. So I imagine what Bitcoin is trying to do is trying to break this down, right? And if it's successful, then the dominance should shoot up, right? Now, Ether Bitcoin has some seasonality to it. And I've said all year that Ether Bitcoin is likely going to bleed in the second half of the year, and is likely going to bleed for most of the year, but definitely the second half of the year. Go look at quarterly returns for Ether Bitcoin. Every quarter it's been red this year. Every single quarter. In Q1, negative 11.5%. Q2, negative 0.8. That's more of a wash. Q3, negative 2.3. Q4, negative almost 15%. Heikinashi candles for the Ether Bitcoin pair, the monthly Heikinashi candles, have been red every single month in 2023. Now, what I'm looking for with this is my expectation is that eventually it breaks down. Eventually. It might not be this year, although I think it could be. If Bitcoin can get if Bitcoin can extend this rally higher, then this could easily break down. It could break down even if Bitcoin doesn't extend the rally. But I mean, if Bitcoin does extend the rally higher, then Ether Bitcoin could break this support level. Now, there is some seasonality to Ether Bitcoin. We talk about this seasonality literally every single year, and that sometimes it does show some renewed strength against Bitcoin starting in around December, January timeframe. Sometimes that renewed strength only lasts like 1 month. Sometimes it lasts for a few months. But if Ether Bitcoin holds this level for the next like 5 weeks or something, then there's more credence given to the idea that it could get a short-term bounce back up before then rolling over, right? Now, some people are really rolling their eyes. We're like, well, why can't it just bounce and hold? It could, right? I'm not going to say that it can't. It could. If anything, this market has taught me a lot of times when a trade goes your way, by the time by the time that you want to go brag about it, it's probably time to sort of take the reverse trade. Like last year, I was very public that I was sort of trading my ETH for Bitcoin right here. I bragged about it right here, and then the rest is history, right? It went back up. I mean, it was a lower high, right? But it still went back up, and I had to painfully wait for it to come back down. And now it's back down here, right? So a huge drop in a short period of time. If Ether Bitcoin holds this level over the next 4 to 5 weeks, then it could get a seasonal bounce, right? Like in sort of that January. Like here you can see that the bounce started in late December. Here you can see we got a bounce in January. So I'm looking at this thinking like, okay, if this holds, then you could see it bounce. Even if it bounces, I would still expect it to roll over. That's the issue, is that like even if it does bounce, it could get rejected here at like 0.058. Maybe it goes higher and then it rolls over. Maybe it gets rejected by the bull market support band, which is currently at 0.05981 to 0.06038. Anything's possible. But my view on the Ether Bitcoin pair is that this is a massive distribution phase, just like last cycle. And that has been a theory that a lot of people have very much disliked, but you can see that for the entire year, this has been nothing more than a series of lower highs and lower lows. That's all it's been. That's all it's ever been this year. Lower highs and lower lows. So, you could get an example where Bitcoin, let's say the spot ETF is approved, Bitcoin rallies some, it breaks all Bitcoin pairs down, Ether Bitcoin drops into the end of the year, everyone sells their Ether for Bitcoin because Ether's breaking down, and then maybe Ether sort of kicks in that seasonal bounce and then goes back up and then rolls over again or something, right? Like something like that could happen. If Ether holds this level through the next couple of months or so, then I would say the probability of a bounce back up to the upside becomes increasingly likely. It doesn't mean that it has to, but it would become increasingly likely the longer it holds that it could actually get a bounce back up to the upside. It's kind of like this. I mean, like it held here for about a month, and after holding for a month, it bounced back up. If we're in mid-December and Ether Bitcoin is still at 0.052, then I would say the odds of getting at least a relief rally into the first part of the halving year go up. If it's down here, then the odds of a bounce in the first part of the halving year are probably even greater, because now it's, now it's completely sold off back down to like the 0.03 to 0.04 range. If you look at like Ether USD, I mean, this thing has been like the bane of my existence for the last 2 years, because, I'm still of the opinion that it would be nice if it could go back to its logarithmic regression trend line. It hasn't done so yet, right? I mean, Bitcoin did, Ethereum has not. If Bitcoin does get a secondary scare eventually before the halving, then I imagine that would do it for Ethereum. But in the short term, this is sort of the track that Ether has been on. And so, if Bitcoin rallies, it can drag the market up with it, right? I mean, like if Bitcoin goes up more, of course, it can drag Ethereum potentially up to this upper trend line, and then we'll see what happens there. But if Bitcoin sells off here, and let's say like the spot ETF is denied, or if it's like a sell the news event or something, the more you tag this trend line, the more it could break to the downside. I do want to say something, just because I feel like I'm talking about everything in this video. I've talked a lot about a secondary scare for Bitcoin, so I do want to address that. First of all, there's no guarantee it happens, right? I mean, just to be completely brutally honest, there's no guarantee that it happens. It might not happen. The reason why I think it will happen is because every single prior cycle, we've had a 40 to 50% drop in Bitcoin before the halving. 2 of the times, it was in the halving year that it occurred, right? So like if you had to imagine here in 2012, before the halving, Bitcoin dropped about 45%. In 2015, it dropped about 46%. And then last cycle, I know what you're thinking is going to say the pandemic. Forget the pandemic, right? Just look at this drop, right? Look at this drop here. It dropped 53%. So, I mean, it always has dropped 40 to 50% before the halving. So far, it has not dropped that, that token 40 to 50% drop. Remember, some of these drops didn't even occur until the halving year in prior cycles. And also remember, there's no guarantee that it even happens. It's always possible that Bitcoin just rallies into the recession. A lot of times risk assets just rally into a recession, and then you might get a massive sell-off into that. But there's no guarantee that it happens. So you have to plan accordingly. Right? It's important to hedge. It's a good idea to hedge. I've said this all year. It's a good idea to be hedged for all potential outcomes. But if it does get a secondary scare, like it has for the last three cycles, then I would imagine that would be sufficient to break Ether down and to sort of revisit these other levels. Again, I mean, I fully understand that if Bitcoin just keeps climbing the wall of worry for the next 6 months, it's more likely that Ether goes up than down. But that's sort of what I'm thinking about, anyways. So Bitcoin dominance is now at 53%. I think it's going to keep going higher. One of the other ways that you can measure this out is to look at the fib retracement from this sort of breakdown here. Last cycle, it went all the way back up to the 0.618 before it topped out. This cycle, the 0.618 is around 60%. Now, guys, I'm not like stubborn to the point that like I'm going to say it has to hit 60%. It could be 61%, it could be 62%, it could be 59 or 58%, right? But I still think it's likely heading to that 60% milestone, just like it did last cycle. That's my view, is that it's heading towards 60%. What once seemed like an outrageous claim when dominance was at 38% probably doesn't seem like such an outrageous claim anymore now that it's at 53%. And the reason is because Bitcoin leads the bull market. So if you believe that we are in a bull market taking us to new highs now, Bitcoin leads. And the altcoin market won't really catch up until after Bitcoin hits new highs. It doesn't mean that it won't sort of get dragged up occasionally, but it won't really catch up to Bitcoin until Bitcoin hits new highs. And if it's not a bull market, right, if we just go back down and revisit the lows, like we did for the last couple of cycles, right, where we revisit the low here, we put in a higher low in March of 2020. If something like that were to happen in the, in the next 6 months, then well, what do you think happens to alts? I mean, they get wrecked, right? They get wrecked. So, I mean, that's where I am. And I know a lot of people are like looking at this and thinking like, well, there's no way. I mean, like, the altcoin market is up a lot. And, I'm looking at these altcoins, they're going up very quickly. I get it. I completely get it. And there's no guarantee. There's certainly no guarantee they're going to go put in a new low. But I mean, I do remember last cycle, I was DCAing Bitcoin, Ethereum, Link, and ADA in 2019 and 2020. And, sort of in like and also in 2018, but that was a mistake. At least for the altcoin for ADA it was, but I still remember how it played out for the altcoin market, right? Like it just felt like it was never going to end, and I mean you can even see like similarities like in this move for ADA, and I feel like I have PTSD from it, and maybe that's my problem that I have to deal with, but it's sort of like these double tops followed by sort of a some attempts to break out throughout the last part of the halving year, followed by a rally into a recession, right? I mean, like I get, is it going to play out the same way? Absolutely not, right? Absolutely not. Any type of recession this time, which is no guarantee, but if we do get a recession this time, then it's probably going to be a very different recession than the one we had in 2020. But I mean, I just remember like how brutal it was, right? I mean, I imagine if you take a bar pattern on this and you sort of just compress it because there's less volatility this cycle than there was last cycle for ADA, and you just sort of overlay it. I mean, you can kind of see that same move, right? Like where it sort of yeah, like it just sort of it gets this double top, it comes down, it then rallies up, and then we get a recession, and then all these altcoins went and put in new lows. Is it going to play out like that this time? Probably not, right? Probably not, because you're not going to get some type of like pandemic style crash, but you could get a crash due to something else, right? I mean, it could be due to a more prolonged recession. It could be a slow bleed. Maybe you don't even get a recession and this drop never materializes. I don't know. But I mean, it just goes to show that even when you think there's absolutely no way that the altcoin market could go put in a new low, the altcoin market can surprise you. It's like the, I mean, similar thing with like Chainlink. Chainlink didn't put in a new low. Chainlink was very, very bullish over here before the pandemic drop. But I mean, you could even imagine here, right? Looking at Link USD throughout, this was the this drop right here was the pandemic drop, and you can just sort of overlay it, right, and see that like it basically made the exact same move and then still went back down. If you're going to come ask me, is it going to do the same thing? I'm just going to say no, probably not. Because if we do get a recession, it would look very, very different than the one we had in 2020. But I mean, it does go to show you that the market will constantly keep you on your toes, right? It will constantly keep you on your toes. So when we think about Bitcoin dominance, we must ask ourselves, why do we spend so much time talking about this? Is it really that important? For me, it is. Because for me, it tells me if the altcoin market is worth the risk or not, with respect to Bitcoin. That's all I care about. I don't care if my altcoin goes and puts in a lower high or a double top or even a slightly higher high if Bitcoin has been outperforming it for the last 2 years, right? What I care about are my risk-adjusted returns, and Bitcoin has been by far the safer and easier play for the better part of 2.5 years. And that will likely change once we get back to looser monetary policy. But it hasn't, I don't think it's changed yet, although we should talk about an invalidation criteria. Someone asked me this on Twitter, and at first I was like, come on. The more you think about it, I mean, like it's relevant, right? What is the invalidation criteria to all this stuff for Bitcoin dominance? What would cause me to change my mind? Well, for one, if it were to put in a lower low. I mean, it's been putting in higher lows all year. It's been above the bull market support band all year, except for this wick down here in January of 2020 or 2023. If it were to put in a higher low, if it were to put in a lower low, then I might have to rethink my theory on dominance. But even if that happens, it would still likely chop around at these higher levels for months, giving me the ability to convert my Bitcoin to altcoins if I think it's in a topping process. But why would I think it's in a topping process when every couple of months or so, it just goes and puts in a new high? I can't tell you how many people told me that it had topped out back in June because of the RSI and some type of divergence or something. I don't even know. And then here it went again and put in another higher high, right? RSI is a silly indicator to use to tell you if the highs are in. I mean, it can remain overbought or oversold for months before it changes direction. And wouldn't you know, it went higher. But why did we say it was going to go higher? Why did we say 52% was not the high? My main reason was I thought that Ether Bitcoin needed to break down, right? I thought this was a distribution phase. And if Ether Bitcoin is breaking down, if Ethereum dominance is breaking down, the Bitcoin dominance is going up. So how was it possible that 52% could have ever been the high? In my mind, how was it possible that this could have ever been the high if Ether Bitcoin still needed to break down? That was why I thought that. And now it's been breaking down and Bitcoin dominance is higher. If Bitcoin can pump long enough to break Ether Bitcoin down, or if it dumps and Ether Bitcoin drops, where do you think Bitcoin dominance goes if Ether Bitcoin drops down to like the 0.03 to 0.04 range? And it might not happen this year. Maybe it happens sometime next year after a seasonal bounce or something. The dominance of Bitcoin would only continue to go higher, which would be in agreement with our theory that dominance goes higher until we get back to looser monetary policy. We're not back to looser monetary policy, therefore Bitcoin dominance likely goes higher. No matter the direction of Bitcoin USD, this is the thing that I think people think that it has to be because Bitcoin goes down. Guys, the dominance theory has always been that Bitcoin dominance goes up no matter the direction of Bitcoin USD. No matter what. In the bear market year, in the pre-halving year, you basically get us to looser monetary policy. Until then, Bitcoin dominance is likely putting in higher lows. That's my view, right? So I follow the dominance, not because I'm a Bitcoin maxi, not because I hate altcoins or anything like that, but it's because it tells me whether altcoins are worth the risk with respect to Bitcoin. And so far, in my mind, they have not been. And again, could you go out and find 10 altcoins to prove me wrong? Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's go find them together, right? Go look at Link. Nice move here, right? Look at XRP. Higher lows all year. Go look at most other altcoins. They've been crushed for the better part of 2.5 years against Bitcoin. And by the way, Link Bitcoin has been crushed. Yes, it's gotten a nice move here recently, but it doesn't change the fact that it's been putting in lower highs since August of 2020. Since August of 2020, Link Bitcoin has been putting in lower highs. Maybe this will be the time it breaks out, but it hasn't proven itself yet. This is at least somewhat, just to see it sort of break out of this trend line, back tested and hold the 20-week is something. But again, it still, at this point, is a lower high. So yes, we can go find plenty of altcoins that you could say, had I DCA'd this as opposed to Bitcoin, I would be better off, right? But I would again argue that that is survivorship bias. For every one that you can find that goes against it, I can probably point out 10 or 50 or 100 that basically fell into line into the general thought process, that we had. So, as far as dominance goes, I would like to see it get to hopefully back up to 54 or 55, maybe even 56% over the next couple of months. 60%, I think will probably come, but it might not be until much later in the halving year. I don't know. It could, of course, occur at any time, but that's the journey I think we're on with Bitcoin dominance, and I think we'll continue to stay on that journey until we get back to looser monetary policy. I think we're done. I think that covers it. I honestly, sometimes I like doing the dominance videos. Other times I don't like it because I know people are going to dunk on me on Twitter, and say all sorts of stuff about, well, if you had bought DOT at $3.50, like, you'd be up, right? or ADA or whatever. And I just can't help but think, yeah, but like I was better off with Bitcoin, right? Better off with Bitcoin. And that's been the case for the last 2.5 years. It'll likely change in the next 6 months, is my guess. In the next 6 months, we'll likely see, not in the next, but sometime at some point in the next 6 months, will likely be the turning point for alt Bitcoin pairs, right? Because especially if we get back to looser monetary policy, and it could come sooner. I mean, it could come in 3 months, right? It could come in 2 months. I don't know, but I imagine that will happen, and when it does happen, it'll likely be because we're looking at looser monetary policy, and these riskier assets can finally start to outperform Bitcoin. So before you take to Twitter to dunk on me again, just look at Bitcoin's performance compared to a lot of these other coins, right? Here's Doge, by the way. That was the recession low for Doge, right? I don't know. We'll see. We'll see if it goes down there or not. But that's sort of the view here. Is you can dunk on me if you want, but all Bitcoin pairs continue to bleed. Bitcoin dominance keeps going higher, and Bitcoin heavy crypto portfolios has been the way to preserve the Satoshi valuation of your portfolio, not a random basket of altcoins. A person who was able to identify the altcoin that would outperform Bitcoin, congratulations, right? Congrats. Most of them did not. Props to you for doing so. Last cycle, I stuck my neck out and got a couple altcoins, and Link outperformed Bitcoin for the pre-halving year. ADA did not. So it was sort of like I was batting 50% with respect to that. And also Ethereum. And Ethereum did not either. So really I was, batting less than that with alt Bitcoin pairs outperforming. But yeah, I think we'll wrap it up. So with Bitcoin, just look to see if it does pump, look to see if alt Bitcoin pairs break down. If it dumps, look to see if alt Bitcoin pairs break down. If it does go up, I mean, it likely would drag the altcoin market with it, right? If you look at total 3, you can see that it's sort of coming back in to these prior highs that it was back in April, right? That's where it's gone back to, which is funny, again, because Bitcoin is way above where it was in April. So we'll wrap it up there. Thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up. We also do have the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. I will not continue to be relentless on the altcoin market in the halving year, because I do recognize that in the halving year, at some point, is where altcoins start to outperform Bitcoin. So just a fair warning that my tune on the altcoin market will change in the halving year. It's just that from my own experience, it's been better off to be heavy Bitcoin in both, sort of the bear market years and pre-halving years for whatever exposure you want to crypto. We'll wrap it up there. Thank you guys for tuning in. I'll see you next time. Bye.